the multi-generational thing piques my interest because you could almost say that generally in the United States, multi-generational household isn't a thing. There's a lot of data on longevity of life and health when it's multi-generational. You have more to live for when you're actually living in multi-generational households.
We talk about that within our family with other friends and stuff like that. Like my in-laws and my mother live with me. The idea, I mean, and it was just set in, the idea that once someone gets old, they go to a nursing home, that would only be in a situation where, you physically could not care for them.
Grandparents or great-grandparents at the holidays, sitting there with their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren who are just so filled with joy, and they can just sit back and look and say, all of this came from us.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big deal.
Fernando Marquez, thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Fernando, you are the son of immigrants from Cuba. You
Correct.
are a father yourself and a grandfather.
Correct.
And you're a real estate investor.
Correct.
Thank you for having me on. So I want to start out by asking you how with your parents being immigrants from Cuba in the early 70s.
Correct.
How did that play a role in how they raised you and how you raised your kids?
Well, I remember, it was a close-knit family. My dad worked. My mom basically stayed at home for many years. I've got two younger brothers. So our younger brother was born in 73 and the other one was born in 75. Going to church every Sunday, meals with the family, so a very traditional household.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you're raised, do the right thing, be kind, be helpful, all those things, stick up for yourself. So it was a very traditional household. And then with my kids, I passed that along to them as well. I've got two boys and two grandkids. As a matter of fact, one of them turns 4 today, and the other one turns 2 on Friday. So everything that I learned as a parent, I learned from my parents and my upbringing and things like that. I had a great childhood. Grew up in New Jersey from 71 to 86. Great childhood. No qualms. I mean, you get into trouble and mischief and stuff like that. But I mean, I look back on my childhood living in New Jersey and very fond of that. So,
would you say that there was any parenting attributes that your father had coming from Cuba that was different from all the other kids in your neighborhood?
No, it was pretty similar. A lot of the other kids that I grew up with, if they were Cuban, they were also immigrants. Their parents were immigrants. I grew up in an area where there's a lot of Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, a lot of Cubans. Then you've had some from Central and South America, but it's not like you see today. A lot of them were really that I grew up with mostly folks from the Caribbean, the Caribbean islands. You did have some from the other countries, but not as much as like you would see today.
Mm-hmm.
But so a lot of the family structures were like that. I mean, you went to church, it was grounded in faith, and one for probably, Baptist, that type of church, and a lot of Catholics. But it was a lot of similar attributes from family, very close knit. Back east, it's not uncommon for generations of family to live in the same household. Your parents, either moved to Florida, to Miami, which was like the connection. The Cubans would always want to move to Miami, so they would leave their house to their kids. And then later on, the kids would, leave it to their grandkids. So that you would see a lot of that. They have rent control over there, so you would see generations living in the same condo. So a lot of similarities in upbringing and in morals and values and things of that nature.
Okay, yeah, the multi-generational thing is piques my interest because you could almost say that generally in the United States, that multi-generational household isn't a thing.
To a certain extent.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's very valuable though. There's a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of data. There's a lot of data on longevity of life and health when it's multi-generational. You
yeah,
have more to live for when you're actually living in multi-generational households. Um, you know, you can go back as far as you can,
yeah.
pick up a man, and they were multi-generational households supporting each other. And that term, it takes a village to raise a
Oh,
child,
absolutely.
stems
And
from that.
yeah, and now you see that now, and we talk about that within our family, and with other friends and stuff like that. Like I, my in-laws and my mother live with me. So the idea, I mean, and it was just set in. The idea that once someone gets old, they go to a nursing home. That would only be in a situation where you physically could not care for them. But if they're just old, and you can care for them. Like my wife's my mother-in-law's main caregiver, and she has her issues getting around and walking and stuff like that. But you know, it's just what you got to do. But that nucleus is, I wouldn't want it any other way. I mean, we're very fortunate, living in this country, and all the opportunities that we've had. I mean, it's impressive, and I enjoy being around my family, having get-togethers all the time. If it's not at my house, at my brother's house, my son's house, things like that are, like really everything revolves around the family, 100%.
I really like that. It's something that my parents and me and my sisters that we try to do is to keep the whole family, the multi-generational thing together as much as possible. And we have friends or even my wife who that is just so foreign. Like my wife initially when she came to into my life, she thought it was weird how close me and my siblings were to each other and let alone to our parents and our grandparents. She thought that was just odd.
Yeah, because they're just not used to it.
Hmm.
My kid's mom is not Hispanic, so to her it was somewhat foreign. To see that closeness and that unity, because like anything else, if you're not surrounded by, you're not used to it. You see it as something foreign. Now it wasn't foreign like, oh my God, I hate this, I don't like it, but it's just like, hey, why would you guys spend so much time together, or why you guys are always in each other's homes as often as you are. And then people get to, and I would say most people, once they understand it and they see it for what it is, they do embrace it. As something like, and it always starts with something like, wow, that's weird, but it's okay. And then it gets to the point, it's like, after a while, it's like, man, I wish my family was like this, because I mean, it's unique. It's very nice to have that interaction and have that respect. And then you bring in your kids to it. Like my grandkids are now, like I said, 4 and 2 this week, and they're learning Spanish. And my daughter-in-law is understanding it a lot more. So there's more benefits to it, and it's not a like being in their business, because that's one thing that a lot of people that don't understand. It's like, oh, don't you have your personal space, and they have their personal space, and you're always in each other's business, and you're all this stuff. And it really isn't like that at all. And there's a lot of respect and boundaries and everything else, but the time that you share, and is special. And for us, like for example, in our family, birthdays are a big deal. It doesn't matter if you're, like my grandkids 4 and 2 this week, or I'll be 55 later on in September. It's a birthday. Everybody gets a birthday cake. We all come over. We recognized it, and that's just another opportunity to get together and have a cookout and enjoy that time. So it's very important.
Yeah, one of my goals in life is to have a compound where
Oh, yeah.
my, my parents are, my sister and her kids. I have two sisters actually. If my older sister's willing to even live on the compound, her and her kids, the whole bit, even have a house for my in-laws,
Yeah.
regardless of how stubborn they are,
Hmm.
we'll reel them in one day.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, no. So I love to hear that that is a way that you guys are living in, how you were brought up in that way,
Yeah.
because I think it's really important, especially for kids and grandkids, to learn from those multi generational,
Yeah, it's very important.
yeah, those
And me
traditions and
personally,
values.
yeah, me personally, I can say I enjoy probably, or I enjoy more sitting down and talking to older people because they have so much great information to pass along, wisdom, knowledge, and just their experiences and how you relate to that. As much as I do talking with some of my peers, but talking to my aunts and uncles about, just normal talk about how things were in Cuba, what they did, things of that nature. Passing down wisdom and knowledge is key.
Completely agree. Couldn't agree more.
Hmm.
What would you say are some of the biggest things that you learned from your father, being that he was from Cuba, and that you had to pass on to your son? Do you have sons, daughters,
Yeah, two boys. Yeah,
two boys?
I was a bit of an overachiever, so I had just turned 19 when my oldest son was born. So I got a little early start, and then his brother came along about 17 months and a day later. So my youngest one just turned 34, which is Julian, and then Anthony, or is it, actual name's Antonio, but we call him Anthony, and he'll be 36 in December. So I would say like the number one thing, that my dad would pass on is, you know, for him, he was always such a kind person, being kind and nice to other people, and literally the type of person he just would, you know, take his shirt off his back if someone needed it. He would give away more than anything. He was not a good businessman. He could not charge people. He worked at Ford Motor Company, but he did electrical work on the side to bring extra income and HVAC work, and he was just horrendous at business because someone would give him a hard luck story, oh, that this and that, and he would just like not charge him, or like he worked basically just to help other people. If he got some money out of it, great. But basically, he was just giving it all away. And then at that, he would drag me along, and then he would give me money to come with him and help out and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that has always stuck with me. There wasn't anything that he wouldn't do for someone else, and if he couldn't do it, he'd find someone else to help him. So being of service to others and helping out is probably the number one thing that sticks out, amongst other things, but I would say that one for sure.
Yeah, and really quick, there's I can hear it knocking pretty good.
Hmm.
I don't know if like you're tapping the.
Oh, that was probably my ring as I was. Okay,
Oh,
yeah.
okay. I was just wondering because it's
Yeah.
coming through pretty good.
Okay.
But with your saying about your father essentially giving back, I feel like we live in a really individualistic society where it's people just so much are like, what can I get for me out of it?
Right.
And I like the fact of it's like, well, how can we help others besides the fact of it not being the best business decision? But
Hmm.
where's that balance of, being able to give back to as many people as possible while still being able to support yourself?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a fine line there because I know for myself. I speak for myself and my wife. In our business, and she also has her flooring business. She's a contractor, and then I have my regular 9 to 5. So there's always you always want to do more. So in our investing business, when we got started, we always said that, hey, no matter what, every year we're going to give something, or more. We feel super blessed. We've done really well over the years. So, and you always feel like you want to do more. Like, for example, my mom's very involved in the church, and always has been. And that's where we got our faith from to this day. And there's always something going on, and a lot of times you want to do more than you can, but as long as you do something, particularly, there's so much need out there, and I can only speak for myself, and we're so fortunate. I mean, I hear things that happen to people, new immigrants coming in, just you hear all the stories, and you reflect and you go, man, I don't have any problems at all. I mean, none. This person that's going through this struggle, this person that just got here, this person that has an illness, that's a serious issue. So then I look back and I go, man, I can give this guy $100, and you do. Like today, I gave some money to this lady from church. Unfortunately, she's young. Fortunately, she passed away from cancer, left a husband and a 3-year-old. So people from church got together, to help, and they have for the longest, so you always have that. I hear stuff from extended family members, in Cuba from my mom. And it's like, yeah, here's $50. Everybody chips in. You go down the street, you're at the red light and you see someone down on their luck. That's another thing I got from my mom. She always has $1 bills. Okay. And so I'll try to keep money in the car. For me, I give them $1. What's $1 for me? They could really be down on their luck and $1 means something, or it could not be. They're just ginning the system, And so one of the things I learned from my mom, she goes, well, it could be that he's not telling the truth, but I don't know that. So I'm giving freely because I want to, and that's fine, And so, in a perfect world, I would give as much as I possibly can and then some, because giving for me and my wife and, my immediate family, giving is so much more than taking something or getting a gift. Seeing someone else, bring a certain amount of joy to them, or surprise. It's pretty impactful.
Yeah, I have a similar belief. I give money to any time someone's asking for money on the corner. If I have cash, I just give it to them. And kind of how your mother said, my thought process is, I'm not the one. Who am I to judge?
Right.
I'm not the one to judge them on what it is that they're going to spend it on, because I don't know. They could be, not the luckiest person on hard times. They could be spending it on drugs, but I can't make that decision. And whoever their creator is, there'll be a judgment day for them, for us all.
For sure. Absolutely.
I definitely, that is my thing where I just give cash to anybody who's asking. Yeah.
That's awesome. Good for you.
So I want to jump into marriage and how, and what do you think creates a strong, lasting marriage?
Okay. So when I talk to people about this, with friends, stuff like that, I think I got the answer, because this is my second marriage and it's my wife's second marriage as well. So I think everybody has to have their say. You have to, obviously, you have the respect and, the things that are given. You love each other, all of those things. That's one component, but it's not everything. I've known people, we probably all know people that are just madly in love with each other and they still have to get divorced because there are other aspects of it that just aren't lined up. So you take, you love each other is one thing. That's part of the recipe. But and communication is like super important. And what I mean, it's not just like you and I were communicating. It is setting time aside to have meaningful conversation, to get that input on whatever decisions need to be made between the couple. And it could be anything. Obviously the finances, future kids, house, whatever, vacation, but you have to have time to have conversations, and it could be about anything. And I'll give you an example. My wife and I, when we first started dating, and I picked up pretty early on that she was just acquiescing to anything I wanted. So I'm like, hey, baby, let's go to the movies. What do you want to watch? Oh, no, whatever you want to watch. Okay. And then the same thing with dinner. Hey, babe, what do you want to eat? No, we can go here. We can go. Well, what do you want to eat? You want to? No, I'm fine with whatever you want. So I started seeing a pattern of that, and I'm like, well, I'm not really knowing what she wants. So we had a conversation with her. I said, babe, look, you know, I think at the time we started, I can't remember right now. We've been married for going on 16 years. So probably like 2007 or though. We've been dating about a year. So I was like, look, babe, you know, I went through a marriage once. You've been through a marriage before. You know, we love each other. You know, all of these aspects like we're discussing right now. But I need to know what Lauda wants. I need to know what Lauda likes, what she doesn't like. So that's important to me. So basically, I opened the door and I said, look, you're not going to offend me by telling me your opinion on something if it differs from me. You're not going to offend me if I make plans to go to a movie or do an outing and you're like, you know what, I've been there, you know, I'd rather go here. I need that. That's communication. So to answer your question, it's that type of communication, the likes, the dislikes, I don't want this, I don't want that. And I kind of created a monster, but you get the point, you know, now, and then it's been like that for years, but then, you know, it kind of made her put her guard down a little bit, or to where it was okay to have a disagreement on something, you know, on something like that. But then it opened it up again because, you know, if it was any other kind of conversation, she can express herself if it's different than mine, and it's perfectly fine. You know, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. So, you know, that part of the communication is crucial, which is a little bit more deeper conversation than like, hey, I'll be home at 5, or like, hey, I'm going to do this. So it's a deeper communication between the individuals. I think that's really, really important, with all the other aspects being a given about love and wanting to be with each other and respect and all that. Those are a must as well. But I think the bridge, that key, is that deep communication and understanding and the balance of what each other likes and they don't like, what they want to do, what they don't want to do, things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm going to double down on that. I think that is communication has been the single biggest improvement in my wife, in our marriage. Once we really started to focus on our communication, I stole this actually from Jordan Peterson,
Mm-hmm.
where he says have a minimum of 90 minutes a week, which isn't very much time at all. There's
No.
168 hours in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And he just is like an hour and a half in a week of just talking about how the household's being run.
Right.
Just talk.
I heard him talk about that as well.
Yeah, and granted, we do way more than the 90 minutes,
Right.
but we schedule intentional time away from our kids where we just talk, and we will talk about how the household's being run. We'll talk about some of our vision for our kids as they're starting to get older, because my kids are 7 and 3. We'll, you know, talk about what it is that she wants to do in the future, some of her dreams and goals. Well, how can I support her in those, because she's been a stay-at-home mom forever.
Mm-hmm.
And we just communicate about everything.
That's super.
Everything.
Yeah.
And we call each other out too, because kind of like how you were saying, you guys open the door for communication. So when something's brought up, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
So we've opened our door up for communication to where I can call her out on her shit and she'll call me out on mine. And it's okay. It's like we're able to be like, yeah, you're right, I'm slacking. Yeah, I'm doing, we'll just say, busy work versus productive work. You know,
Right.
you know, maybe I am getting a little too much focused on something and not my boys. Like, I'm glad you called me out on this. Just anything where I feel like if people aren't communicating, they can take offense to the things.
Yeah. It's also trust. You got to be able to trust each other that feedback you're getting is on point. You know, you got to have the trust in your partner to relay that info, and your partner has to trust in you to accept that info. So yeah, it's very important. I like that very much.
Yeah, because if the trust isn't there, then they might not be willing to ever even say it.
Right.
And then there could possibly be resentment in the future. It's that the kettle pot that's eventually just going to blow,
Hmm.
because they're just holding it inside. Communication to me is, I always joke that successful marriage is being very sexually attracted to your partner, and it gets a laugh. But then I'm like, but seriously, like communication.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Good.
All right, so now I want to ask you, what role do you think um, being a man of faith plays into a successful marriage as well?
You know, I mean, I guess there's several aspects. I mean, obviously, being a man of faith, and when I say a man of faith, I mean, it's not like I'm one step below being a pastor. I mean, I'm a work in progress, and I'll always be. Um, but in my opinion, in order for a relationship to work, and you've got one person of faith, the other one has to be, because I think there's going to be a certain level of conflict, and not like big conflict, but it's going to be, something like, why do you do that? I don't believe that. In our family, you always pray, and you get together. My mom's over there is praying, or my wife will pray, or my sister-in-law. So I think everybody has to be on board. You know, to a certain extent. Maybe not. Someone that goes to church every Sunday. Like really, really involved. But a person of faith can be, someone that prays often, that's a believer, that puts their faith in God, things like that. So, in terms of the relationship, I've seen relationships where, one person, I would say, is a believer and the other one is not quite sure, and work out. But I think when both both are on the same sheet of music, one may be a little bit more than the other, that's fine. But as long as there's understanding, of why the other person has faith, what it means to them, when there's prayer going on, things of that nature, you have to be kind of like on the same ball field, so to speak. So I think that's a key right there.
So, what do you say to a young man who's very into his faith, dating a girl who she's not of faith, but she's not opposed to it?
Mhm.
And he's like, I think I want to marry this girl. What is the advice when he's like, hey, what's your 2 cents on this
You know,
situation?
that's a good question. I mean, I've never been in that situation. I mean, I would have to, my first thing would be like, has she ever had faith? Has it been around her? Did she grow up, with family members going to church? Does she have some understanding of what faith is, or a particular religion? And just try to figure out if there are points of contention, or there are points of agreement between, that young man and that young woman. So I would say it's so much easier if, let's just say, it's a blank canvas, than someone that doesn't like it or is opposed. Because you could always say, well, they'll come around, but probably not. I mean, you see a lot of relationships in which, like, you know, the gut feeling of the guy or the girl is like, no, I'm different. I'll make them change, and we all know how those things turn out. So it's kind of I would say it's a serious deal, and I only know this because I'm 54 now. When I was younger, I really didn't think like that. I'm thinking, it's no big deal or whatever. But as you grow older, you experience a lot of things, you become wise and stuff like that. So I would say it's an individual that has faith, and is involved, and really deep down inside, that they would need to. It's kind of a serious decision when you find a mate that everything's on point, but that they're not of faith. So it would be like, are they completely opposed to it, or are they like, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn or find out, things like that.
Do you think if the man, this young man in the example, if he is a, he's a man of God, he is a masculine man, he wants to be a provider, a leader, do you think that he would be able to lead this young woman, marry her, and lead her in, because he's diving so much into the word and changing his life to be more Christ-like, more godly-like, whatever term you would want to use, that he can lead her into the faith?
He could, but it's a 50-50. He can have all those attributes, but then on her side, she would have to be submissive to that. And not submissive in a negative connotation, like, because most people, it's kind of a trigger word when you hear submissive. It's like, oh, I'm less than, and I'm not worthy, and I just, no, it's just that she has to let that man lead, and that comes with the communication, the love, the trust, and the confidence that he has instilled in her, that his qualities of being the leader of the family, the provider, the protector, are not just words, but she can see it in his actions.
And then being Cuban, parents from Cuba, was there distinct gender roles of the father, roles of the mother, that were just passed down culturally?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, a lot of what you see nowadays is just different. I mean, in that household, it was real simple, and it wasn't to degrade a woman. I mean, that's just how it was done. All that backbreaking labor, because my mom's side of the family, they're all farmers, tobacco farmers in Cuba, and that's outside, and that's a lot of work, and it's backbreaking work, and you're out in the heat and stuff. And then the women would take care of the kids, household chores, and things like that. So it was definitely defined roles, and it wasn't looked upon as a negative, like nowadays a lot of it is. And in my household was the same thing. And like one of the things I always noticed was there was no real they probably had discussions similar to that, but when they got married, I mean, there was no like, okay, here's like huddle up, all right, like all of a sudden let's huddle up, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this, I'm not doing it. It wasn't like that, because their parents, they learned it from their parents. It's definitely cultural, so like while growing up, there was no question about what needed to get done. My mom would just tell my dad, hey, this is wrong with this. He'd get it done, and there was no question about, my dad came home from work or whatever, that he was going to cook his own meals or have to clean his own clothes or anything like that. That was just already taken care of. And that was just a mutual understanding, and then and we pass it forward, like here with my wife. My wife is phenomenal. She's a go-getter, and she always has been, so she takes care of her mom, she runs her own business, and she takes care of all the household duties, and I always look at her, I was like, man, she does a lot. And I've offered her, hey, babe, do you want me to do the laundry? Do you want me to do this? And no, that's fine, I'll get it done. And a lot of times I just jump in there and help her. But coming back from that old school upbringing, those defined roles were there, and I've had discussions with a lot of people about this, a lot of younger people, usually at work or other settings and stuff like that. And I'm like, roles, like when you said gender roles, that's a huge trigger for people nowadays, particularly women, I would say, less than men, from my experience. They come up with that. And I'm like, hey, everybody has a role in a relationship. Now, you guys define what that role is going to be, so like, you don't want to cook, then don't cook it. He cooks, then he cooks, whatever. You want to cut the grass and he does the laundry, that's fine. But everybody has a role to play, and whatever you guys decide to do is whatever you guys decide to do. But, the way I grew up, they would define roles. And basically the easiest thing would define it would be, if it was outside the house, my dad did it, aside from, fixing up the house, that electricity, stuff like that. If it was in the house, caring for kids, cleaning, cooking, stuff like that, my mom took care of it. And my dad was a phenomenal cook, and he did a lot of cooking because he enjoyed it, but definitely defined roles within the relationship.
Yeah, I'm going to go one step further and not call them gender roles because I don't want to trigger nobody. I want to call them biological roles, which
Okay.
might even be more triggering.
Yeah, for sure. I like it. Keep it going.
Yeah, because I believe when you look universally, there's no culture in the world where those kind of roles that we just described are reversed.
Mhm.
It's only in America
It's a good point.
where we're trying to diminish the nuclear family and the biological roles that are ingrained in us as human beings.
Right.
And so it's one of the reasons why when you told me you're from Cuba, I have a boxing background. I've met and talked with so many Cubans over a 25 year span because they have an amazing boxing program in Cuba.
Mhm. Right.
One, your property, so they pretty much make you do something. You got to
Right.
pick, or they'll pick you. But aside from that, when I meet people who are literally from, or their parents are from, and their parents can share the information, it's like, let's talk about those cultures and the roles that people played in those and the values, because I believe that those things are important, highly important. And me and my wife, because you got to understand, my wife she grew up where I'm at in the Tahoe area, but then she moved to Newport Beach, California. She was Cinderella at Disneyland, and she was around like movies, TV commercials. She was on a CSI episode. She was in this horror movie. She had done a little bit of acting, but she was being programmed about being a boss babe. You need to be independent. You can do everything that a man can do.
Right.
And when we first started dating, I wasn't looking for a wife. But then it became clear that this woman's going to be my wife. And so the communication, we had to continuously talk about, okay, being a stay-at-home mom, how are we going to raise our kids? What is the roles that we play? And she was so adamant for the longest time that she needed to make her own money. I have to make my own money. What happens if you just up and leave me? Then I don't have anything. And it's like, well, to me, a commitment to each other under God is very, very powerful. And that was the thing that I made to her, is a commitment, a marriage, a covenant, you could say. And so it's my duty to provide and support her in however she wanted. And then once we had our first child, really, like, she started to listen to her biological clock of, I do want to stay home with this child.
Right.
I do want to be the caretaker. And she wanted to start, I guess, nesting, where she's just like doing household things versus worrying about a career, because she had gone to college. She had these aspirations of a career. And then now she's trying to support other moms of like, if you're being called to be a stay-at-home mom, it's like the greatest thing that I could do is raise actual humans and not let strangers raise the humans that were created from my body. And
Right. Absolutely.
allowing my husband to be that provider and lead us and lead the household. But I will tell you, man, it was culturally, being from her being from Southern California, there was a whole lot of chiseling away at a piece of stone
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Because when you're ingrained in a certain way of thinking for a long time in culture, particularly in these large cities that are very, they're very liberal. You get a lot of that stuff. And a testament to her and you guys that she, with your communication stuff, she naturally came about, like you said, it's like, hey man, I don't want to do this. This is purpose, and this is fulfilling, and this is for my future and my kids' future and my husband's future. So, that takes a lot of her trusting you and you leading the family, and then her just coming around to it. It's like, yeah, this is exactly what I want. I don't want that other stuff. So good for you guys.
Yeah, and I had to be there to support her when she would start to second guess the
Right.
being a traditional wife, being a stay-at-home mom, being a homemaker. I had to support her and be like, okay, there's never been a woman in history, we're still looking for her, who on her deathbed wished she was pushing more papers.
Yeah.
They're still looking for that woman.
Ain't that the truth? Yeah. And then you always hear stories about women now in their 50s, late 50s, early 60s, who did everything, highly successful, everything you can think of. They don't have a need for any material things, but they've come to realize that what they want now, they can't have it, which is a family, kids, grandkids, because then there's that reflection when they see their friends, going into those later years, and they have these huge families and everything else, and they don't have it. And so I've read a lot of stories about women, highly successful, driven women that gave up relationships and kids and everything else for the career. There's a lot of regret there.
I've heard very similar things, and from elderly couples who are either grandparents or great grandparents at the holidays, sitting there with their children, grandchildren, great grandchildren, who are just so filled with joy, and they can just sit back and look and say, all of this came from us.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a big deal. That's a
All
big.
of Yeah, all of this came from us. And it is extremely lonely if you were that person who decided to put a career ahead of children.
Mhm. Yeah,
Now, I'm not saying there's not the exceptions, because there's going to be that exception, but we shouldn't make the exception as an excuse to make the rules
right,
for everybody else.
right.
And I
That's,
acknowledge that there's exceptions in everything,
yeah, and
but
yeah. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, but it's not the rule.
Right.
So it shouldn't be our arguing point.
Yeah, you hear that a lot. So almost like there was no other option. It's like, oh, it had to be done this way. No, it's not. And there's many situations, and we can all point to where where we know friends or maybe family members, that they can't have a stay-at-home mom for financial reasons, but they make it work. Either they downsize or they just pinch pennies, but they both have to work in order to survive. But they still have their family, and they're devoted to their family, and the family nucleus doesn't suffer because both parents have to work. They just have to work that much harder within the family to, for it to be as successful as it is. And that's just the reality of it. But I agree with you 100%. We all have options, particularly in that scenario that you're explaining. Yeah, there are options. Do you have to be that boss lady CEO, and devote all that time? What if you were just a director, but you were married and had kids? You didn't have to, you see what I'm saying? There's variables to it, so it's a good point.
Yeah, bringing up the sacrifice to make it work, I think that resilience will only spread to your children
Hmm.
when they realize, my family sacrificed so my mother could stay at home and raise me.
Right.
And all the mental benefits that come with a mother being able to stay at home to raise her children in those children. This sacrifice, downgrading a house for a couple of years, maybe we, don't buy the boat.
Right.
Maybe we don't go on a couple of vacations because we are sacrificing for the long-term gain.
Yeah.
You're playing the long game because it's the investment into your children.
Right. Absolutely. And I see that a lot. I've seen that a lot. I mean, we grew up like that. It's like, hey, we got what we need right here. We don't have to go get a new car. We don't have to get a new TV. All of those things. There's a lot of penny pinching. I mean, I remember, and that's a really good point. It's like we don't need, or I should say, you have to define a need versus a want. And you constantly have to keep thinking about those things. So we definitely live in a very disposable society, and a society where, hey, I want that yesterday. I don't want to wait and save up and do it because I've got other things. It's like, oh, this came out, boom, I got to get it. I mean, when I grew up, it was a while ago, but my mom set me a limit. She was like, maximum $20 for sneakers when I was a kid. So Adidas and Nike were like 40. It's like, and I had to go to, the equivalent of what would be like, I don't know, like a local Walmart, and get the ones that everybody would look at and make fun of you for. Like, I know you got those, that type of stuff. Nowadays, it's 120, 150 bucks for a pair of sneakers, and you see people walking around all the time with them. You're like, wow. I mean, I kind of know their financial situation in that family is not very good, and they got brand new sneakers. Just one of the things that stick out. There's no like, when I grew up, there was a lot of hand-me-down stuff. So it's definitely a paradigm shift in how family structure is taking place in terms of what we're going to sacrifice for the family versus what we're going to do now and forget about tomorrow, things of that nature.
Yeah, and I don't think that helps our children.
No, it's a good example.
Yeah, I don't think it's very good. Like with my kids, I try not to make I try not to allow them to by any means get whatever they want. If my son, we'll just say he wants a toy, I'm always like, did you bring your dollars? Because he earns money. He mows his grandparents' yard. He puts out flyers and will mow a neighbor's yard every now and then. And just trying to instill in him, like,
That's amazing.
you can earn this. And he's 7. He's been doing it since he was 6.
Yeah.
And then he'll be like, okay. Or he'll say, I didn't bring my dollars. Can you give me a loan so I can use it? And then my wife does this great thing where she makes him put a percentage of everything that he earns into a savings account or into like an investment account, because he'll want a snowblower so he can snowblow other people's yards for money. It's like,
Nice.
all right, invest into the
That's awesome.
snowblower account.
Yeah, man, that's powerful. That's a
Hmm.
powerful tool right there. That'll stick with them because, as you know, kids are nothing more than a sponge, a dry sponge, and they're just going to take in all of this stuff, and it'll stick with them forever. So good for you guys. That's great stuff.
Yeah, and my point with that is, it's like, you're not going to see no Jordans on my boys.
Yeah,
Like, I don't care if I have the money for the Jordans for them and
right.
it's nothing. You're not seeing fucking Jordans on my kids.
It's crazy. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff. Especially but it's insane. I mean, that's all I can tell you. When I see that stuff in sneakers and everything else. But what are you gonna do?
Yeah, or my 7-year-old, he's playing flag football right now with kids in kindergarten and first grade. And there's these kids out there with the Nike cleats and like the Nike gloves, and they look like they just, walked out of a Foot Locker and they're playing for the NFL. My kid, he plays in his tennis shoes. He doesn't have any of the sweet. He has a pair of gloves that he bought himself for $18. They were on sale at the big box sports store that he
Mhm.
bought with his own money. I don't get him any of the cool like compression gear or
Right, right,
wristband gear. He doesn't. He looks just like a kid playing schoolyard football,
right.
and he
Yeah,
happened to buy his own gloves. And people are like, why doesn't your kid wear cleats? It's like, well, he's 7. He's not even generating enough force to
yeah.
need
It's
cleats.
not necessary. That's right.
We're creating little entitled monsters
Absolutely.
without realizing it.
Without realizing it. Yeah. Because it's really the parents living vicariously through the kids in one form or the other. you know.
So true. And I am that dad who from day one was like, I know what I did in my sports career. I don't need to live through my kids at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And I played football and I was very good at football. And I didn't even get my son a football. My son found out football by accident
Oh,
6 months ago. And then he was like, I like this football thing. I want to play some football. And it's like, all right, well, there's a flag football league. I wasn't going to put him in football because I don't need to live through him.
right.
But I support him in whatever it is that he wants to do.
Cool. Very nice. I like that.
But we're going to bootstrap it.
Yeah, yeah, you have to. You know, it's a valuable lesson. It's a valuable. It reminds me. I was watching a documentary, and I forgot this one producer's name. A very well known producer. And when he was a kid, he told his dad about some jacket that he wanted in like 40s or something like that. And he goes, "Oh, you got to come out and take a look." He showed him his jacket, and he said something like, "Oh, yeah, I need you to buy this one." And he told his son, he must have been like 10 years old, and he said something like, "Let me explain to you how this works, okay? You want that jacket? You got to go out on the streets and earn the money so you can buy yourself the jacket." And basically, you know, paraphrasing. And I was like, every parent should do that. You know, instead of I want. Well, you know what? You got what you need for sustenance and survival from me. But anything else that's a want, you got to go out and hustle. And, you know, he lived his life that way. So, yeah, it's a valuable tool to provide your kids. They won't understand it, you know, but that's perfectly fine. They'll figure it out. So.
Oh, yeah. My wife has my back into where she reminds him, like, the things that dad does to you, he tells you, you are going to benefit for it in the long run and you'll understand it later. You have to just trust us.
Yeah, it's teamwork for sure. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Fernando, I think this is a good spot to end on.
Yeah.
I appreciate you getting on the pod.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I like talking about these things.
Yeah, we'll have to do this again in the future as well.
Absolutely. So, yeah, just let me know. It was a good time. I appreciate you. It was great talking to you. And we'll talk in the future.